A few weeks ago, I got a wild hair to do a franchise video. And of course, there's a lot of top 10 videos out there. And a lot of them, I think, as I watch them, they have the same kind of emotion and subjectivity to them that I actually initially had when I made my top 10. I think many of us on my channel, that watch my channel, can probably rattle off the first 10 franchises that are near and dear to their heart without even blinking. And in fact, I did the same thing. But I thought, I want to do something a little different, something that has more objectivity to it. And so what I did over the last couple weeks is rank the top 30 franchises. But I went a step further and I ranked them based on the individual films. And I scored it out of 10. It's a 10 scoring system. So, everything, basically, for example, Phantasm, the 6 Phantasm films, or the 5 Phantasm films, the total score would be 50, and each film would be ranked individually, and then I totaled it and got a percentage weighting. And I went through, the scary part of this is I was easily able to remember and identify all the films from over 30 some franchises. So I've watched a lot of movies, and many of these, multiple times. But the interesting thing about this, and what you're going to see in this video, I think it's going to be very controversial, because my top films weren't even in the top 15 when I was done, or the top 10. It was shocking. And of course, when we get to it, I'll explain what I think is going on. I think the message is, as you watch this video, no matter how objective you try to score a film, it's still a subjective thing. I mean, it's based on your feelings and whether you like the film or don't like the film. At the end of the day, no matter how you do it, quantitatively or subjectively, there's always going to be an element of subjectivity. And in fact, my scoring system, as you're going to see, is a little bit unfair. What I discovered is even my attempt to make this an objective video is patently unfair to some franchises, which I'm going to explain later. But the scoring is the scoring, and I didn't manipulate it. What I did was I took what are the top 10, 15 franchises that immediately come to mind. I listed those. And then I went through and did another 15 just to make sure I'm capturing a wide enough spectrum. And then I went through and scored each film just based on my feelings about each film, summed it, totaled it, and got a weighted percentage and sorted it. So that's what I'm going to show off today, and it should be, I found it very interesting, and I think if you do that, you may be shocked and surprised as well by the results. All right, let's get this rolling. Now, a couple ground rules. Franchises to me are 4 films or more. If it's a trilogy, I didn't consider it. For it to be in the top 5 of all franchises, you must have at least one 10 out of 10 film. And then for the top 5, you really need a consistent score across the whole franchise of at least 5 or more. Although the weighting, by definition, the weighting boots a lot of films out. So that criteria really is duplicative. It doesn't really matter. Once you start weighting it, any of the dogs in the film series take the weight down so much that you don't really need to exclude them. All right. So let's get started. I guess the first thing I should mention is that some also rans that didn't even make the top 30, although they got weighted and scored, they didn't have a high enough score to even get in the top 30. And the first runner-up was Silent Night, Deadly Night franchise. And we all know, the first film was so great. I love the first film. The second film is not a good film, but it's a hell of a lot of fun. And then it kind of tails off. You got some dogs in there. The third film is just a dog of a film, and that just torched the scoring. So Silent Night's runner-up. Paranormal Activity missed the 30 cut. I don't think any of those films are very good. I don't think running around with a shaky cam and boo scares is very good. And the more you watch the franchise, the more tedious I think it becomes, in my opinion. So they didn't even make this. They didn't make the cut. The Howling franchise didn't make the cut. Why did it not make the cut? Well, yeah, the first film is a masterpiece practically, and I gave it an 8 out of 10. The second film is not good, but it's a hell of a lot of fun. I gave that a 7 out of 10. And then the series just goes to shit. I mean, you know, the rest of the films just nosedive and tank the whole scoring. And like, for example, Howling 7, I give a 1 out of 10. I can't even feel good about a 1 out of 10. If you've seen Howling 7, it's not even a horror movie. It's a 70-minute, 90-minute country line dancing movie. And so that movie alone just killed the score for it. Leprechaun didn't make it. I know there's fans of the series, but Leprechaun movies, I'm not a fan. I gave the first film a 7, and there's a few 4s and 5s in there, but it's really, I don't know, it's just not, I watched the whole series on Netflix. I like it. I dislike it so much. I don't even have a Blu-ray of the film, so nothing to show on that. Resident Evil didn't make it. I'm not a fan of those films. I've got the Resident Evil films when I've rewatched them, but it's just style over substance. It doesn't do anything for me. Conjuring didn't make it. I didn't even score The Conjuring because I haven't seen more than 3 of the films, so I couldn't score it. And Amityville is the same way. Although I love the first film, actually I like the first 3 films. To me, it's a trilogy, and the rest of it that come after that, I've not seen any of those to even render an opinion. So those are the ones that kind of miss the cut. Okay, number 30. Coming in with a total score of 54%, Evil Dead. Now, the Evil Dead, and really, the only way you can even score Evil Dead under my criteria as a franchise is to throw the reboot in there. I mean, it's a trilogy, and you gotta throw the reboot in there. So, I love these films, and I scored it accordingly. I have an 8 in there, a 7 in there. I think the Army of Darkness and the reboot bring down the scoring slightly. And that's kind of what happened when you look at the weighting. Is it just wasn't, the last 2 films weren't solid enough to be up there in the scoring. So that's Evil Dead number 30. Next up is at number 29 we have Sleepaway Camp. Love all 3 films. First film I gave an 8. The next 2 films a 7, and then this trash I gave it a 1. The 4th film just tanked the weighting and the scoring. And so I think the thing you're going to see throughout this series is 1 and definitely 2 films can just tank a franchise when you score it up against the others. The two takeaways that you're going to see in this is that's number 1. If you don't have consistency of scoring throughout the franchise, that's going to kill the weighting. And then secondly, the difference between being in the top 10 and say the top 15 is only 1 percentage point. When you get to the top 15 franchises, it's like 0.05 difference sometimes, which again, I mean, 1 point score of one film could sway it one way or the other. So you just got to keep that in mind when you're just looking at this. The reason I bring it up is because some of these things, the scoring shocked me so much. I was like, well, do I really feel that way about the 6th film of the franchise? But I said, no, I'm not going to manipulate the scoring. I'm not going to do that. What it came out to be on the first go is what it is, and I'm not going to mess around with the weightings of individual films to try to change the overall result. So at number 28, Children of the Corn. First 3 films are good, really, really good. And first film I gave an 8, second one a 7. But again, like really kind of like The Howling, you got some freaking duds after that. I mean, the films that followed, some of them were just bad. In fact, one of them I scored a 2, and so that's what tanked the results for Children of the Corn. At number 27, we have the Final Destination franchise. Now, all these films are entertaining and good. Are they great? I don't think they're great. I got a 7 in there, but a lot of them are 6s, which to me is still an above average film. But they're just not earth-shattering films. It's from my perspective, I like the franchise, and they're a fun watch, but I don't consider it a top-line franchise. And then number 26, Chucky. Good old Chucky. And you can imagine what happened on the scoring on this one. I mean, the first 2 or 3 films were really, really good, and when you get the Bride and Seed of Chucky, I mean, the score is what they are. I mean, it's just, I think I've rated, well, I give it a 4. The lowest score in the franchise was a 4. So that ought to give you some idea of the overall score of the future franchises higher up in the ranking. One franchise film with a 4 can put you near the bottom. That's how tightly scored some of these franchises are, and really the difference between some of these franchises is 1 or 2, basically 1 movie. And a lot of people are going to say Chucky's in my top 10. Well, what I would suggest is why don't you score each film first and stack it up against the others, and I think you're going to be as shocked as I was at the result, because I think our passion and our emotion, because we love the first film so much, we kind of put Bride and Seed out of our mind and say, well, I mean, it's still my top 10. Those movies suck, but I mean, if you're going to be objective about it and score each one the way they should be scored and total it, that's what I'm finding. Some of these results are going to really shock you. I don't think this is necessarily shocking, but it's going to get more shocking as we go forward. So that's number 26, and I'm going to take a brief break and come back with numbers 21 through 25. Hang on just a second. All right, back with number 25 in the top 30 franchises, horror franchises. Number 25 is a film series that's near and dear to my heart, and it had an overall score of 61%. And that is The Mummy, Universal's Mummy films. The first film with Boris Karloff is such an iconic film. I actually give it a 10 out of 10. The series kind of dovetails off, and I won't deny that. The series does dovetail off when you get to Mummy's Hand and Tomb, but I got to tell you, at the end of the day, these are not bad films. They're just extremely repetitive and not a whole lot of uniqueness to the script and the story. But the problem is, for me personally, I grew up with these films. I mean, I would stay up. The big deal for me was on Saturday night, chiller theater, stay up to midnight, and these mummy films was what they would show, and so it's in my DNA, and I acknowledge that they're not great films, and I tried to be objective when I scored it. I mean, there's a couple of 5s in here, there's a 6, and even a 4, and that's why it's kind of at the bottom of the franchise stack, but it's still a franchise that's worth some time and attention. And Lon Chaney Jr. is just, say what you will about him, he's great. I mean, it's just these are fun films and worthy to be recognized in a franchise list. Number 24 is Wishmaster series, and I've got the Best Run Blu-ray at my office, because I'm watching them currently at night, so I don't have it to show you. But I recently rewatched all 4 of those films, and they're fun. The first one's really, really good. I gave it an 8, and the last 2 are not bad films. I gave them a 5, so that's kind of why they fell down to the bottom of the tier. But still, I think Wishmaster deserves some recognition. The first 4, the 4 films, you got 2 good ones and two okay ones. So next up, number 28, Wrong Turn. And Wrong Turn, again, I think you start out solidly with the first 2 films. I give them a 7 out of 10, and then we kind of tail off into some 6s, and in fact, you got a 5 in there. They're not bad, but they're entertaining, and I think Wrong Turn deserves to be somewhere on a franchise list, but I've got it at number 25. Actually, that's number 23, sorry. So 25 was Universal Mummy, 24 is Wishmaster, 23 is Wrong Turn, and now number 22 is Hellraiser. This one hurts, because I really initially in my list had this in the top 15. But some of the films are not good, as we all know, and Revelations is one of those. I mean, some of the scoring on some of the later entries just tanked the franchise. And this is probably where there's a number of examples where maybe my scoring system is not entirely fair, because when you pit a franchise with a lot of films against, say, a really good franchise that only did 4 films, like Psycho, for example, to me that's inherently unfair, because by definition, the more films you put out there, the more likely a dud's going to result. So, but the scoring's the scoring. That's, at the end of the day, can there really be some true objective scoring system, entirely objective? I don't think there is. But the flaw in my scoring is the lengthier franchise with more films, there's just a dud in there somewhere, and that affected the scoring. So Hellraiser, unfortunately, first film's a 10, second's an 8. I can get a third an 8, and then we get off and trail off into some 5s and 6s and some 2s, and that's just tanks it. So it's in there, but it's just not high up. At number 21, we've got Scream. And Scream, the first film I gave, I like the Scream films. I don't think they're earth-shattering. In fact, the first one I gave an 8. The other films I give 7s and 6s. So it's a solid franchise. Solid franchise. I don't think it's a top 10 franchise. It's missing something for me. But I think had it not happened, who knows what would have happened with horror in general. I mean, I think the Scream series, you have to recognize that at the time that it came out, horror films were really in a lull. We needed an injection of something new and exciting, and and this brought slasher films back around and brought the horror genre back around. So yeah, Scream number 21, and now we're up into the top 20, and I'm going to take yet another small break, and I will be right back. Okay, number 20, with a score of 65%. This is a series that initially was clearly in my top 10, top 5 actually. I mean, the first film is a masterpiece, and but when I score it, each film individually, it actually just fell out. So here we go. TCM, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The first two films, although I have to say the first film's a masterpiece. It's a 10 out of 10, no problem, 10 out of 10. The second one, when I saw it in the theater growing up, and I saw it with my mom, by the way, when I was a teenager, I didn't like it. It was a divergence from the original. Yeah, I didn't like the comedy, the dark comedy, but now I love it. And I give that one a 8 out of 10. But here's the problem. I mean, and if you're really objective about it, you can love TCM all you want, and I do love it. But there's no way around it. The fourth film sucks bad, and it just affects the overall scoring. I actually like I actually like a number of the films. I give Leatherface a 7. I gave Leatherface a 7. But you know, that Next Generation man just torched the series for me. And the recent film I thought which did all of the backstory, I didn't like it. So Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I think, is one of those series that is a victim of a lot of films and some missed movies there. I mean, some duds. And this scoring just is when you score it, it's just brutal. It's not forgiving at all. You know, emotionally, we want to put the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise in the top 5 just because of the first film. But you know, if you do an objective assessment of each film, there's other franchises that I think are more consistent. Maybe the best way to describe it is there's more consistently good films in other franchises than Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So yeah, that was you know, that was on my first list. I went down, boom, 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 boom. First 10 was easy. Everybody can rattle those off. But when I scored it, it is not even in the top 10. So that's shocking. I'm still kind of trying to mentally get my arms around it. How can Texas Chainsaw Massacre not even be in the top 10 franchises? Next up is the Saw franchise. Of course, the first film is an awesome, awesome film. I don't think it's a masterpiece. I gave it a 9. I think the second film was a 7, but then you get some duds in there. I got a 4 in there and a couple of 6s that, you know, take it out of the top 10. But it's a great franchise. But again, it's just one of those that they've made so many of them, and some of them are just duds. Next up, Tremors at number 18. I will unashamedly admit I like all the Tremors films, including the new one, Cold Day in Hell. They're not great films, you know, but they're solid 6s. There's a 7. The first 2, I think, are 7s. And the consistency of the franchise is what keeps it a higher rating as a franchise. There's just no real duds in there. If you like the first film, you're probably going to like the others. I mean, it's basically the same storyline. So yeah, I mean, the characters are great. I like the change of the settings. You know, I didn't overrate these. I mean, like I say, I've got a number of 6s in here. There's no 10s. There's the highest score is an 8. But it made it, top 18. Now here's a series that I think doesn't get a lot of attention, but probably should, and that's the Blind Dead saga. These 4 films, it came out to be 17 in the rankings. And again, you've got 4 solid, atmospheric, moody, creepy zombie films. And they're all basically the same consistency. You know, there's no drop off, I think. I don't see it in any of the 4 films. I rank them all 7s. I like them all the same. And so that consistency of the scoring is what got them their position in number 17. Number 16 is the Living Dead films. The first film was great, but there are some bad films in this series, and it weights it down quite a bit. The first film I give an 8, and then I've got some 6s in there. Yeah, but I think this is another example of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where you've got a great initial entry, and then you've got some duds that just bring down the overall scoring. So, yeah, I've got this at number 16. Now, on to top 15 franchises. All right, now we're into the top 15 horror franchises. At number 15, with a score of 68%. And again, now you're getting into less than 1 percentage point difference in these films. It's amazing how they stack up so close to each other. I mean, many of these films could easily be top 5 with just 1 point different rating on one particular film in the franchise. So you may come up with a different list if you do the scoring the way I did it. Phantasm, number 15. First film I give a 9. Second film I give an 8. The third film, as I've talked about in the series I did on Phantasm, I don't like the third film. I don't hate it. I don't like it. It's a 5. I don't like the characters, other than Reggie Bannister, obviously. And then the last 2, a 7 and a 6. I think the last film was a homage to the Phantasm series and can't be judged as harshly as some people have judged it. But yeah, I give Phantasm as the entry point to top 15. This is the one that's going to blow people away, I think. This series was my number 1 series when I just rattled off. Boom, 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 boom. What are my top 10, 15? Boom, 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 boom. This was number 1. And it now sits in number 14 spot, Friday the 13th. Yeah, I love the films. And this is the one that troubles me about my scoring the most. I mean, it was my number 1 pick. I can watch any of the films. I love them. But let's face it, Jason X, no. And even Freddy versus Jason is not a good movie. I mean, when you start rating these, so this film, this series is Exhibit A for probably why my scoring system is not entirely fair. Because let's face it, I mean, of all the franchises out there, this one put out the most films, you know, and Murphy's Law says you're going to have some bad ones in there, and the weighting system doesn't take into account emotion, you know, unless you go back in and overweight certain films to offset the rating. But I didn't do that. The first 4, in fact, I gave just for FYI, I gave the 4th film, The Final Chapters, a 10. The first film an 8, the second film a 9, the third film an 8, and the 4th film a 10. But then it's a serious drop off. And the next 2 films are 7s, but then you really get some 4s in there, and it just weights it down. But yeah, this is the one that probably is going to upset the most people. But I would encourage you to maybe take a shot at scoring it the way I did and see what your results are. Next up is a series I don't hear anybody talking about. Invisible Man. Number 13. First film's a masterpiece. And every film after that is a solid film. I mean, if you really look at each film by itself, yeah, there's a few sixes in there. But it is a solid, consistent series. Even Abbott and Costello, the last film was Abbott and Costello Meet the Invisible Man. That's a good movie. And what you're going to find now, getting into the top 12 or so, is they're so consistent. There are no duds in the series, at least from my perspective. Next up at number 12 is Nightmare on Elm Street. First film I gave a 10. Second film I gave a 6. Third film a 9. And then it's some 7s and 5s. But again, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street, similar to Friday the 13th, you've got a few duds in there that weight down the overall average. But again, you're talking about out of 30 franchises, this is number 12, so it didn't weight it down that much. And its overall score was right at 69%. So yeah, number 12. And I think this was definitely top 10. It may have been just under top 5. At number 11 is the Hannibal Lecter films. Silence of the Lambs, masterpiece. Manhunter, fantastic film. The last two, one's a 5, one's a 6. But the two beginning films are so strong. It just. And again, this is probably where, you know, four strong films can outweigh 12 films with varying degrees of scoring. So a little bit unfair in that respect, but you know, it's 4 solid films and one's a masterpiece, I think, The Silence of the Lambs. So yeah, that's Hannibal. Now we're going to get into the top 10. This is going to be really interesting. Now that you know Friday the 13th didn't even make it, and Night of Elm Street didn't make it, and Texas Chainsaw didn't make it. So what the heck is in the top 10? What is wrong with Wayne? What is this? This is a very strange list. Well, you're going to find out. Top 10 coming up. Okay, here we go with the top 10. Now, just to let you know, in this 10th spot, the 10th and 11th spot, and, well, actually 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, these 4 spots are basically a dead heat. I mean, any one of these could have been higher up in the spot. Omen, number 10. The Omen, the first 2 films are awesome. The first is a masterpiece, a 10 out of 10. The second film, Damien, is an 8. I saw Damien in the theater, by the way. Great movie. And then the next films are 7 and 6, and the reboot sucked. I gave it a 4. But even having said that, you know, those rankings all together still put it in the top 10. So yeah, that's the Omen. Number 9. The Exorcist films. Yeah, the second one is bad, but it's not as bad as people make it out to be. I think the ending is bad. I actually think the film was very, very intelligently done. They just blew it. The ending just kind of blew it. But the first film's a 10. In fact, as many of you guys know, the original Exorcist is, I consider, the best horror film of all time. The second film I gave a 5. And then actually the prequels, the third film's great too. And the prequels, although maybe lacking in a few things, are really good movies. I give them 7s. So yeah, The Exorcist scores high. Number 9. Coming in at number 8 is Halloween. And Halloween, similar to Friday the 13th, I mean, the reality is you've got a couple duds in there. We all know what they are. We know the crimes and what movies and what franchise were the criminals that deflated the franchise, but they're there. Halloween, the first film was a 10. The second film I gave an 8. And then a slew of 7s. But as you can well imagine, when you get out there to H2O and some of those, we start to lose it. But again, you know, these franchises that produced more films and took more risk in terms of the overall score, they're I guess in some ways this scoring system is unfair, particularly when it comes to Halloween and Friday the 13th. But I mean, at the end of as I said before, I mean, it's kind of hard to create a system that's entirely objective and fair to everyone, but it is what it is. Next up, Jaws. And Jaws is a fantastic film. And I consider it a horror film. Animals run amok, echo horror, but still horror. First film's a 10. And the second film, I give it an 8. The third film was a 7, and then The Revenge is a bad movie. I gave it a 3. So, again, I think you've got a situation where you've got less is more in terms of the scoring. You know, the more films you get out there with the more bad weighting, you end up with dropping in the rankings a little bit. Next up was my number 2. When I rank these just off the top of my head, my number 2 ranked franchises, which is it's not going to be on anybody's list except mine, and that is Hammer's Dracula. Love these films. There's 7 of them, and they're all so consistent, so consistent. The performances are outstanding. I mean, if you like one, you're going to like all of them, I believe, to varying degrees, but still, I think this is a classic. Horror of Dracula, give it a 10. Dracula, Prince of Darkness, an excellent follow-up. I gave that an 8. There are no bad films in the Dracula franchise, just telling you. Dracula's Risen from the Grave, awesome, awesome third film. I gave that one a 7. Taste the Blood of Dracula. Used to not like this one as much, but it's grown on me even more. And that's the thing about these Hammer Dracula films. The more I watch them, the more I like them. I grew up with them, but they just age like a fine wine. So yeah, Taste the Blood is fantastic. Scars, probably the most brutal entry in the franchise. Fun, excellent film. 80, 72, maybe the weakest of the entries, but still weak as 6. I mean, it's not a bad film. As is Satanic Rites. I saw this in the theater, by the way. I give that a 6. So the lowest score I can give any of the Hammer Dracula films is a 6. So it's up there, man. Number 6. I love that franchise. All right, the top 5 coming up. Okay, top 5 horror franchises of all time. At number 5, with a score of 71.67. By the way, Hammer's Dracula was 71.643. That's how close we're getting. We're splitting hairs now. I mean, any one of these could be number 1, quite honestly, with just that much. This is Hammer's Frankenstein series. The most consistent from a quality perspective of any franchise out there, in my opinion, is the Frankenstein films. Although, having said that, none of them are 10s, I don't think. I give the first one an 8. But there are no subpar films in the Frankenstein series. There are no 6s, no 5s, and certainly nothing below a 5. They're all consistent and excellent films. Number 8, Curse of Frankenstein, at 8 out of 10. Revenge, an awesome, awesome follow-up. I mean, these films are more than just a monster running around. These are character studies of a twisted, psychotic scientist, played brilliantly by Peter Cushing. I mean, you owe it to yourself to work your way through these films. Revenge, I give a 7. Frankenstein Created Woman, probably the weakest of the franchise, if you could call any of them weak. I gave it a 6 out of 10. And then Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, which many people consider the best of the series. Best film of the series. I give that one a 7 out of 10. Actually, I got that wrong. I gave this an 8 out of 10. Evil was probably the weakest of the entries with a 6. And then Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell, the finale, I gave a 7 out of 10. Most consistent scoring of any franchise right there. Great. Well, with the exception of some of the ones coming up. But yeah, Hammer Frankenstein series definitely earns its top 5 status. Number 4, with a score of 72% even. Psycho. Psycho, what can I say? It's 4 outstanding films with very little drop off in quality. Anthony Perkins is just kind of, to me, he's very much similar to Peter Cushing in his role as Norman Bates. He's just the quintessential Norman Bates. He's chews up the scenery, and he delivers in every film. First film's a masterpiece, 10 out of 10. Second film was great, 8 out of 10. The third film, 7 out of 10. And the fourth film, I think, is a 7 out of 10. And the remake sucked. I gave it a 4. You know, if you're going to debate, you guys maybe there's many people who probably would even give it a 1. And if you do that, Psycho's going to drop off your list. I don't think the reboot is a bad film. It's just a pointless film. So a bad film to me is Howling 7. That's a bad film. Or Silent Night, Deadly Night. You know, the third film. I think it was the third film with the. Those are. Bad to me is along those lines. Anyway, Psycho, I think, deservedly has a place in the top 5. Number 4. Next up, number 3 is Alien. The Alien franchise is an outstanding franchise, and I do consider them horror films. Sci-fi horror, but I do consider it horror. Alien is a 10. I think Aliens is a 10. Although it's more action horror, it's still a 10. It's a fucking great movie. And then we've got some films in there that aren't great, but they're not horrible either. I don't think any of the ones are horrible. Even the third film and Resurrection, albeit they're not great films, I'll admit it. I don't like the story and where it went. In fact, I kind of, as I've rewatched these, the CGI of the third film, I think, blows big time. But I actually kind of got into the morose, dark, crypt, the settings and the locale of the third film, and the characters the dark nature of the characters. I actually think, had the CGI not let it down, I think the third film is a much better film than people give it credit for. Anyway, that's Psycho, and I'm sorry, Psycho. This is Alien franchise with a score of 72.5. So you can see it's very, very close at this point. Number 2, George Romero's Dead films. Night of the Living Dead, 10 out of 10. Dawn of the Dead, which I saw in the theater when it was released. It was great. 10 out of 10. And you could give Day of the Dead a 10 out of 10. I give it a 9 out of 10. But I could certainly argue 10 out of 10. This series, of all the franchises, those first 3 films are the best 3 films, in my opinion, of any franchise in horror history. I mean, they're not just good movies, they're great, fantastic movies. Land of the Dead, I gave Land of the Dead a 7. And I rated the others a 4, but the strength of the first 3 propels this series into the number 2 spot. It's 73%. Number 1, and number 1 in horror franchise history with a score of 78.3%, a good 5 percentage points higher than number 2, mainly because of Survival and Diary of the Dead got kind of tanked. It wasn't even in my top 10. Well, it wasn't in my original, let me see. My initial top 10, just off the top of my head, top 10. Yeah, it was. Okay. It was. My initial top 10 was Friday the 13th, The Hammer Dracula, Psycho, Romero's Dead trilogy, or I keep saying trilogy, I shouldn't do that. But it's a trilogy to me because the first 3 films are so awesome and epic. But trilogies don't count in my list, so I gotta quit saying that. Halloween, Hammer's Frankenstein, TCM, Alien, Nightmare on Elm Street, and this Universal's Frankenstein series. How did this get on there? I'll tell you how. The first 2 films are masterpieces, 10 out of 10. And Son of Frankenstein is an 8. It's a fantastic film. The weakest film of the series is probably Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, but it's not a bad film. Not at all. Lon Chaney Jr. carries the film. I mean, I think I gave it a 5 out of 10, maybe. Let me see. Son is an 8. Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, I gave a 7. And then Ghost of Frankenstein, let's see. Son is let's see. All right. Son of Frankenstein is an 8. Ghost is a 7. And then Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman and House of Frankenstein are 6s. Full 5 percentage points higher than any other franchise. And whether you appreciate the old Universal horrors in today's environment or not, no one can argue the fact that these films, without these films, there would be no horror genre, in my opinion. These films set the standard for gothic horror, and they're just masterpieces in a lot of respects. And I don't think they've been given their just due. As time goes by, it's just not cool, to rank these Frankenstein films over, say, Halloween or Friday the 13th. And again, I was probably along in that party myself, because my initial list was Friday the 13th, Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, Psycho was in there, but my top 10 wasn't in there, but when you really do an objective assessment of each film and total it and stack it up against the other scores, I was surprised. This would have never been my top film, even though I grew up with these films and I love these films dearly. It just isn't. It isn't panache, or it isn't in today's setting. I think this is not the series you say the #1 horror franchise of all time. It's just not what people come to expect. But it is what it is. It's my list, and I'm fine with it. I scored it objectively as I could. I hope this video was entertaining and thought-provoking, and I would love to see other people make their own list. Maybe you don't need to do all 30. I mean, there was more franchises. I actually did 40, but again, I cut it off at 30. Just some of the scoring wasn't worth doing. Maybe you do a top 20 or top 15. I would love to see Seth, Celluloid Terror do one, or Turi, T-Money 86, Andrew, Ballina, Todd, Walnuts. I'll actually probably put some tags down in my comment box for people that I would encourage to do this, because I'd love to see your list. And you don't have to. I mean, you don't have to do the Wayne method if you don't want to. I mean, scoring it and then totaling it against the scoring of 10, but choose your own methodology to try to take the subjectivity, try to take some of the subjectivity out of your list and emotion out of your list, and see what it really looks like. I think you'll be shocked. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I appreciate you watching. Thanks.